Is I had you go ahead and create a class 16 session. First thing I want you to do is import session data from class 15. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to go to File, Import Session Data like you have before, and the session that you're going to choose is the last session you used on Monday. So you're just going to have to navigate to that. So you'll go Import Session Data, and then you're going to navigate to where your sessions are. So let's see, in class 15, and choose the class 15.ptx and hit open. It'll bring you back to this dialog. And for today's instance, we're going to go ahead and bring everything in, including tempo and such. So once you're into this window, you can go ahead and select Import Tempo Map down at the bottom to make sure that our tempo grid is the same. And then from there, if you hold Option, so Import Tempo Map, make sure you select that down at the bottom. If you hold Option, in this instance, Option's a due to all. It was also a due to all when we were using it in the mix window. So if you hold Option and click over here on any one of these tracks, it will automatically take the whole group to a new track. So it's going to select the whole group, throw it into a new track. Hey, how's it going? The sign-in sheet's somewhere. It's out and about. So after you've done that, and all of them say they're going to be assigned to destination new track, mine has more tracks than yours because I had to make some duplicates. Then you can go ahead and hit OK. It'll bring them all in. You weren't on this computer that day, were you?
I was.
Oh, and you're not finding it?
Yeah.
Did it get? Check the class log in this folder. It might have gotten placed. Go and check. Go back and check any one of these folders. Maybe you accidentally dropped it into one of these folders when you made it. I'd go in there an extra level and just check. Okay. Well, what you can do is you would have titled it Class 15.
Yeah.
In the search box, you can just throw that in there. So you're gonna those of you who just joined us, you're gonna do your startup procedures and make it Class 16. And I need you to import your session data from class 15. Okay? So, and I guess are you piecing yours together because you're not making computer? All you need for today is kick, snare, overhead left, and then overhead right. Did it come up with anything in the search?
All I had to do was go to Open Recent and it popped up, but I don't know how to.
Well, what you could do is in your search, go back to the Finder Command tab, when you do the search. Oh, it came up with nothing when you did it?
Yeah. I mean, could I maybe find it?
Oh, here. Well, hit this Mac. You see how it says all my files? Switch it to list. Want to go back to the top? May have gone. Go to Documents. That's interesting.
Class 10.
Class 10. Go to Desktop. That is weird. Yeah, I don't know where it went. Okay, well, hopefully we'll find it somewhere. But either way, the information is there. So, again, did you already do it? Yours is good. And you're going to make a new session. Okay. Well, once that's all up there, what we're going to do is we're going to switch to doing some notes because I got to talk to you about what we're going to do today. Let's see, which one? Shoot. Dupe. Hopefully that's the right one. So I'm actually gonna give a little bit of a presentation this morning because there's some stuff that I want to make sure that you understand before we tackle this next topic. So today we're going to be working with compression and limiting. Chad, you're going to see this, I think, in a couple weeks in the other class. So some of this will be you'll repeat a little bit when we get there, just because the topic is exactly the same. So whenever we do manage to get there with that class. Okay, so break out your notes. Hopefully you guys can read this. I need you to jot a couple bullet points down, and I'm going to talk to you about this, and then we'll go through some step-by-step procedures, talk about how we're going to use this in the session. Good, great. Everybody's mostly at the same spot. Okay, so we're going to talk about compression and limiting. Okay, so compressors and limiters. This is a part of processing. So like the EQ was a processing device, and it was frequency manipulation or frequency processing. This one falls into the category of dynamic processing, and you can see that that's where it mentions also referred to as dynamic processing. So dynamic processing has a range of things that fit into dynamic processing, but compression and limiting is specific to dynamic control, so volume control, where the EQ was about frequency control. Does that make sense? So like the frequencies of the sound, this one is the volumes of the sound, how they're being used, and essentially it's restraining the loudest sounds. The entire track can be increased in volume, level, or amplitude without overloading circuits, oversaturating the recording media, or harming speakers or ears. Essentially, what we get out of doing compression and limiting, which in this instance, it's interesting how this works, because you'll see it in the next slide. Compression and limiting typically is a singular device. It's two different processes, but in a single device, you can activate either one or the other. But ideally, what we get out of this is consistency. Okay, so in your notes, under all that definition, I would just go ahead and put a little blurb that says consistency. Okay, the biggest thing is consistency and dynamics. For those of you who do music or listen to music, you may not have realized that the consistency that's required in a musical form. Okay, like a vocalist has to have a certain amount of consistency on a track in order to cut through the mix. But even more importantly, what we're going to deal with today, what you're going to see immediately, is kick and snare. In any type of musical context, always have to have dynamic consistency, because the kick is typically the foundation of the low sub-frequency, and the kick mixed with the bass, whether it's a synth bass or electric bass, typically fulfill that void. Inconsistencies in dynamics result in a feeling of loss in the low end. And remember on Monday, I mentioned that EQ is essentially the reason we need equalization is so that we can create interlocking instruments with their frequencies to fulfill the spectrum. Well, part of that is in fulfilling the spectrum. Let's say we have the kick drum and it's fulfilling the low end of the spectrum. Well, if it has inconsistencies in volume, then it's fulfilling it more and less throughout the song. Does that make sense? Because it's just going up and down and it's not consistently leveling that out. So kick drum, surprisingly, with all of its big boominess, is typically compressed fairly heavily in a manner that allows it to be 100% tried and true, consistent throughout the performance. Snare is another one that's done that way. Bass guitar is heavily compressed. A lot of times electric guitars are heavily compressed. Vocals, a lot of times, can be either heavily compressed or limited. But the cool part is you guys have overheads in your tracks today, and overheads are actually often limited versus compressed. And we'll talk about what those two processes are. For the guys who just joined us, when you get a chance, go ahead and create a new session for today. You're going to import the session data from Monday. And I guess, were you guys out Monday?
Yeah, I was in here.
Okay, so I'll tell you where to get your files from then once we're up and running, once we get into the process. Okay, so restraint for the loudest sounds. I'm going to do probably only one or two more slides after this, and then we move on to controls. We had to really talk about controls. Results are more controlled volume, also more perceivable, audible, understandable recording. Quieter sounds can become easier to hear, especially when combined with other audio. Well, the big thing here is that in a normal situation, like dialogue's a great example. Like when you're working with post-audio with dialogue, dialogue is allowed to fluctuate in dynamics so long as dialogue is not covered up by anything. So like if it's just dialogue of me in a room having a conversation, fluctuation in dynamics isn't a big deal. But as soon as we add music under the dialogue, like you hear on the radio, all right, every time you hear a radio commercial, or even on TV, a TV commercial with a voiceover, every time you see a commercial with music in the background, all of a sudden there's a massive need for compression. And it's to allow for consistency in the overall volume so that at any time in the dialogue, if the volume drops or diminishes, it can be raised up and lifted dynamically so that it is louder than the music and it's never inaudible, okay? So, and that's the thing, you have to kind of think about, well, what's the requirement for, and then I always ask my students this because it changes. What's the requirement for dialogue from the listener's perspective? From the listener's perspective, what do we really need most out of dialogue? Right? Me talking to you, what do you need most? For me talking to you, what's the most important thing? Is it the pitch that I speak at? Is that really super important? No.
Clarity, maybe?
Okay, clarity of what?
What you're saying.
Exactly. Okay, so dialogue specifically points to clarity in what is being said. Make sense? Music is exactly the same way, but on an instrument by instrument basis. Does that make sense? So like you're trying to hear what each instrument is trying to say from a clarity standpoint, but it's a little different because when you're listening to dialogue, you're focused on the words, right? Does that make sense? When you're listening to someone sing, though, I mean, you guys ever been in a spot where you're like, I don't know what they're saying, but it sounds cool, yeah, right? Or I don't know, you know what I mean? Like that happens all the time. And in reality, it's more about the tone and the consistency of the tone. So there's a combination of EQ and compression that go to make those sounds. So we're going to use both, but today's topic is mostly compression. So in order to get through that, I want to just kind of help you understand this. This is the big kicker here. Again, while we're talking about them one and the same, the difference is they operate on the same principle. The only difference is the degree to which they affect the signal. So compression is a little more mild, and it has a range where limiting is very, essentially it limits, shall we say. And they can be used in conjunction. On some devices, there is a separate compression section and a separate limiting section so they can be used combined. But on most devices, it's all one and the same, and what parameters you change actually shifts that. And I don't think, let's find where that, there's one more slide that I want you to see, and then we'll go to controls. Let's see where this one is. I don't know if I have this one. No, I didn't. Oh, here we are. Okay. We're going to jump to controls because just because of the nature of this class, I want to have you guys working with the device right away. Instead of me explaining about it, I could talk for hours and days about how you should use compression and limiting because there's a very artistic element to it. And then there are some elements that are just not artistic at all, right? Or only mildly artistic. I mean, kick drum and snare are somewhat mildly artistic, but when it gets to everything else in the mix, it gets really super artistic and it's based upon genre, right? It's also based upon which artist you're working with inside of that genre, how you'll use these. But the big thing here is the real difference between a compressor and a limiter is the ratio. And you don't know what the ratio is yet, but we're going to go there. So I want you to just jot this down so that you understand this when we get to the ratio segment. Yeah, today's class 16, so you're building it. Whenever you do your new session, it's class 16. Okay. So ratios of 10 to 1 and below are compression. Ratios of 10 to 1, of more than 10 to 1, or 10 to 1 and above, are limiting. The difference here is the math. Now, I love doing math. So funny, I'm working with a copyright law class, and we're going through these legal contracts and talking about the value of the copyright and who owns the copyright and what the numbers really make out to be in certain types of record deals. And I don't know, to me it just seems like the simplification of looking at the math and the numbers. When you look at numbers and you see side-by-side comparisons of values and numbers, you go, oh, that makes sense because this is greater than that. This is why you may choose to or like to do this versus that. In this instance, I won't run you through all of the math, But in this instance, what's going to happen is compression will, let's just say, minimize, okay, and drop out very loud volumes in small increments. Limiting does it in such large increments that what's left over is incalculable. So you can calculate it technically, but it's calculated by decibels that are typically at the 0.01002, with more like 8 to 10 digit combinations after the decimal point. So because of that, a 1 dB difference, 1 decibel difference, which is a volume rating, okay, a 1 decibel difference in volume is typically only audible when the sound source is at nominal and you have your speaker system at least at 85 dB. So it's loud enough for you to hear good solid volume from your speakers or in your headphones, and your source started at nominal. So that 1 dB difference actually makes a volume difference in the mix. But once you get below half a decibel difference, it becomes inaudible for you to calculate. Does that make sense? So what happens is limiting is so, let's just say limiting is so strong in how it reduces the amount of dynamic volume that's happening that they consider it something that we don't even talk about in terms of what values come out the other end because it's so small. So when we think of limiting is a very drastic, sometimes harsh, but somewhat drastic system. Let's talk about limiting for a second. Let's go to controls after that. In limiting, every device you have, either that outputs audio, either has a built-in limiter or just has a maximum capacity for load, okay? If the maximum capacity for load, great example, your little earbuds that you put in your ears as your headphones, the little ones. The smaller ones have a maximum capacity for load, so there's not necessarily a need for a limiter in the system, which means that you could turn it all the way up and it'll never blow your ears because it just doesn't have the ability to volumize. For the systems, for headphones that do have the ability to damage your hearing because of the decibel rating that will come out of them, if you took your iPod and turned it all the way up, or took your phone and turned it all the way up, those devices have built-in limiters. So do most speaker systems, and so does every house system that you'll ever see where you go to, anytime you go to a live concert, there's a limiter on all of those speakers. Now, it's not typically one limiter per every speaker, it's a limiter per channel that are sent out. When you're at Walmart, there's a limiter on that system, right? I mean, anytime you're in a place where there's a public PA or public speaker system, there's a limiter. And the point of the limiter there is it's a physical device that is user-defined. Someone has to set it up and say, this is the threshold that volume can come out of this system so that it's not harmful to anybody in the vicinity. So what happens with that kind of limiter is they call it a brick wall limiter. Oftentimes the ratio, notice the ratio of yours are 10 to 1 and 10 to 1 and above, and that limiting system is often 100 to 1. In a 100 to 1 system, it basically means that if the volume ever hits this particular level, it just gets shut down. It just essentially caps at that level. It's never allowed to be louder. The reason that's so is because you could be at Coachella and some guy on stage accidentally disconnects a mic that's live, and it would literally blow you out of the water. You know what I mean? Like if you're standing near the speaker system, it would probably move you several feet. The reason that doesn't happen in real life is because they put limiting on the system, so when that does happen, it has a maximum capacity output on the system. In most cases, what you don't know is when you go to a live concert with large speakers, some of those boxes are carrying up to 2,000 watts per box. Just to give you an idea, 2,000 watts. The speaker systems that you have within these computers, like basically built on these computers, are usually only 3 to 5 watts. The ones that you're using on your headphones are maybe 15 watts, up to 15 watts. So you multiply that times 2,000, and you understand that the rating on a single box is pretty loud. So when they stack 20 of them together on each side, and you have 40 boxes in this arena, right, you understand there's a large capacity for danger. So it's required, it's a standardized requirement from the government, essentially, the safety committee, to have limiters on those devices at a specific SPL rating. So that's how it plays out in general life that you don't know about, that you never really have to deal with or see. But let's talk about the user-defined experience, the things that you guys are going to do. And let me move up. Let's make sure. Okay. I want you to just jot these down and give them some space because you're going to define each one. These are your main controls. This is the stuff we're going to deal with today. Now, to me, it's all about time spent, so I want to, as quickly as we can, move you into doing it. Okay, so we're going to talk about threshold ratio, attack release, knee, and gain. These are all pretty simple principles. You just kind of have to go with it for a while, and you'll get to understand it as we go. So what happens with this? Okay, so actually I might just draw this on the board so you can get some sort of visual example. When you see your waveform doing this, and most of you have your waveforms on the screen, and if you zoom in, you can see that what happens with the waveform is you'll see inconsistencies in the piece. Okay. Now, both ends of these, both positive and negative, are volume levels, okay? So the 0 point, like when it makes no sound, it does this, right? And when it's softer, it does this. And when it's louder, it does this. So on both sides of the spectrum, you actually see, like that's actual volume increasing on both sides. When we see the visual here, though, oftentimes we only look at the top side, just because it makes more sense to just look at the one side versus both sides, but it's actually something that's going to happen on both sides. So here's the thing. The problem with this, and again, if you zoom into your waveforms and you take a look at them, the problem with this is the loudest points, in some instances, like on a long waveform, this might be the loudest point, and the rest of it might do this, and this might be the loudest point. What happens with this is in terms of volume, we're not able to turn this up much because we are only limited by our ability to use the highest peak volumes there. Once we turn it up, this is as far as we go. If we turn it up just so we can hear this effectively, when this stuff comes, it'll peak and clip and create distortion and be very loud compared to all this stuff down here. So what happens is we need a means of adjusting these volumes so that they're all very consistent. But here's the kick with this, okay? If we just literally turn it up and turn it down, in most cases, that's great in a broad spectrum, right? But when it looks like this, you could just turn this section up, right? You could cut it up and make it a separate clip, turn it up independently. But the issue with it is in most cases, this is what's happening, where those peaks are actually inside of literally just seconds at a time, which means that the inconsistencies that are taking place in the volume are very sporadic, meaning you would have hundreds of thousands of them to automate volume-wise if you did that for every clip. And then, of course, if you had a session that was 90 tracks, then doing that for every track and making every one track consistent is a very, very large job to do in that form. So what do? We use an automated system that does it for us, and that's what essentially compression and limiting is. It's essentially, it's almost as if someone is literally writing the volume control for us. Now they do make a plugin that actually, they make a plugin from Waves, it's called Songwriter, and it does an additional step, so it's not compression and limiting, it literally is a fader that literally follows the volume of the waveform and just turns it up, turns it down to offset it. The problem with that is if you literally just turn it up and turn it down, it doesn't do enough for the processing. Like it doesn't actually process it enough to sound professional by itself. So a lot of people will still end up using a vocal writer after compression and limiting in the final mixdown. Most of the time, they'll do it in a means just to kind of emphasize certain lines or emphasize certain phrases. So like the hook of a song, half the time you know the hook of a song because it repeats. But in most cases, you also know the hook of the song subliminally because they either add more vocal layers to the hook or they'll actually boost the volume of the hook so that there's no way you can walk away from the song forgetting what the song is called, right? In a typical pop song. Anyway, so when we look at this, our goal is to say, okay, well, we we want to minimize the amount of maximum waveforms that are going on here. So we're actually going to set an average. I should erase this stuff. I'll erase the rest of this stuff. An average, what we call threshold, and that's what this first segment here is. So we're gonna create an average threshold, and it's user defined. It's all done to taste, just in the same way you did EQ. But we'll talk about it. I'll walk you through the principles here. Essentially, we're gonna set up a threshold. That threshold is basically gonna say, and it happens on both sides, whatever that threshold level is. So basically, what it says is it's going to say that at this volume, something's gonna happen. Okay. Now the what's gonna happen is how we set up the rest of the device. So nothing happens until we set a threshold and that threshold is breached. And the timing mechanisms of how this works are going to come up in a second. So first we have a threshold. Pretty simple. Nothing too crazy. Next we have a ratio. So the threshold has to be set. And essentially, this is kind of in a long form. Is this the first? It is the first slide, yeah. The ratio setting defines a degree of compression or limiting applied. I would write that note down, the first sentence down. The rest of this, you don't necessarily have to have down, but I would write, I'm going to put some stuff on the board to make it easy. Ratio is actually super simple, but a lot of times people just get it backwards, okay? Oh. So here's how this works. If you could write this statement down for me, and I will fill in the blank and show you how it works. Statement is, for every blank above threshold, 1 dB is allowed to pass to output. It's not listed up on the slides, but this is like a super easy way to remember how this works. So for every blank above the threshold, 1 dB is allowed to pass to output. So what we're going to do is we're going to minimize, we're going to minimize the amount above the threshold in order to, essentially, they call it squashing it, but we're going to control it. We're going to create a consistent kind of average level of what's happening. So in the ratio system, if I said we're going to do a 1-to-1, that means nothing happens because for every 1 dB, and this is in decibels, sorry, above threshold, 1 dB is allowed to pass to the output. If I then said we're going to do a 2-to-1, it means for every 2 dB that goes above the threshold, 1 dB is allowed to pass to the output. So like if I did a 2-to-1, it means that every amount of decibel that passes this threshold point is cut down for to essentially a 1. So if I had 4 decibels above the threshold, for every 4 decibels, in the 2-to-1, for every 2, it'd be in this case if I put 2, for every 2 dB above the threshold, 1 dB is allowed to pass. If I had 4 decibels, how many decibels would be allowed to pass in a 2-to-1? Because for every 2, I'm allowed 1. What if I have 4? 2. Yeah, 2, right? That makes sense? Now, if you guys remember, do you guys remember ratios like in high school? Ratios in high school, essentially, you just invert so that like a 1-to-1, well, it wouldn't make any sense to put it up here, but a 1-to-1 is 1, right? But a 2-to-1 is 1/2, right? Make sense? So the number is half. As soon as I get a 4-to-1, it becomes a 4, right? Does that make sense? So like all you do is flip you see how these flip, the 2 goes down, the 1 stays up, the 4 goes down, the 1 stays up. So now if I say, hey, we're going to have a ratio, we're going to use a ratio of 4-to-1. In a 4-to-1 ratio, for every 4 above the threshold, 1 is allowed to pass. In a 4-to-1 ratio, if I have 4 dB above the threshold, how many pass? No, for every 4. For every 4 above, I get 1. So what if I have 4 above? How many do I get on the output? 1, right? Because that's exactly a 4 to 1. So what if I have 8? Yeah, 2, right? So you see how this works out. Now it all sounds simple in the math now, but most times you're not going to have 4 even, and you're not going to have 8 even. You may put up a 4 to 1, but you're going to get a 7.35, right? And then it's like, there's no real point in doing the math except to understand that as I raise this number, right, the amount that's allowed to pass diminishes. So notice if I had 8 decibels above the threshold, 8 dB above, and I did a 2 to 1, what's my output allowed to be to pass? Yeah, if I had 8 above and I did a 2 to 1, the output's allowed to pass is 4. But if I had 8 above and I did a 4 to 1, the output that's allowed to pass is 2, right? You're seeing how the reduction takes place. Now, what happens so the cutoff between compression and threshold, or compression and limiting, is 10 to 1. So what happens when I go to 10? So let's say I go to 10. For every 10 dB above the threshold, 1's allowed to go. If I had 10 decibels above the threshold, I would get 1 in the output. But what if I have 5? What happens if I have 5 dB above the threshold on a 10 to 1 ratio? Yeah, exactly. I only have half a dB that's allowed to go through. You see how that's pretty small? Now, and that's why that's the cutoff. Once we get above it, it's like, wow, these numbers actually end up being pretty small. Because once we go to 20, and it goes all the way to 100, okay? Let's say we went to a 20 to 1. As soon as I go to a 20 to 1, let's do the same thing. On a 20 to 1, what happens if I only have 5 dB go past? Yeah, on a 20 to 1. Yeah, it's 0.25. See how small that is? Right? You see what I'm saying? It's pretty small once you get there. Eventually, when you go to 100 to 1, here's the thing. On a 100 to 1 ratio, how many dB above the threshold do you have to even get 1 decibel to come through? On a 100 to 1. 100. That's a lot. That's a whole lot, right? So that's why 100 to 1 is considered what we call brick wall limiting. Okay, so none shall pass, right? Because something passes, but it's so minute that it's not calculable. Does that make sense? Now, the reason you need to understand these is because the first thing you're going to see when you open up your compressor is, oh, shoot, I have to define a threshold, and I have to define a ratio, right? Does that make sense? When we get there, I'll just kind of walk you through which ones are best. Let's move on to the next thing. So everybody get that? Everybody wrote that down? Not too hard, right? If you can get this, you're going to be smarter than a lot of audio engineers that are already out there. Because a lot of them, unfortunately, just twist knobs and go, oh, this sounds okay. Not understanding how the ratio even works. There's actually a couple kickers that go into this. Okay, so oh, sorry, this one's not. There's something messed up about the slide, maybe. Huh. Yeah, I don't know why this is cut off, but unfortunately it is, and I can't fix it. This says, please write this down, attack. The attack setting determines how quickly the circuit reacts to the incoming signal. I'll explain it to you though, because it's really simple. I love this stuff. This is like the fun stuff. This is like the really cool stuff. Once you start using compression and limiting, you're like halfway there when it comes to mix down. And if you can really get into it and start using it a lot, these are the exact tools that people that are out there winning Grammy Awards are using. You know what I mean? Like this is the stuff that makes the audio sound good. You guys ever heard those outtakes of Britney Spears singing on stage? It's like you can find out on YouTube. It's hilarious to watch. But it's like this is what Britney Spears actually sounds like on stage, and it's like clips of her raw vocal as it comes to the live console before they do the processing of EQ, compression, limiting, and of course auto-tune, which a lot of people like Justin Bieber and all those people are just using live auto-tune. It's half the time they could be singing the same note and their auto-tune's pre-programmed so that whatever pitch is supposed to be on it lands. Right. So they can do acrobatics and cartwheels and all that stuff. They just have to say something and it's good. Right? If they're even singing at all, but in most cases that they do, when you hear what it sounds like, what a regular vocal sounds like without all this, it's like, oh, that sounds rough. But you process it correctly and it's like, oh wow, this is like radio ready. You know what I mean? And that's how it works. Well, let's talk about the attack though. So literally what happens is you have a threshold, so I'm just going to use the door as my threshold. And all that happens is, so like, if you remember that the compressor or limiter essentially is almost like automating with a fader, it's the time that it takes to react. So as soon as I reach the threshold, it's how long does it take to get to my ratio. Okay, so if I had a 10-to-1 ratio, it's got to go from a 1-to-1 ratio all the way to a 10-to-1 ratio. The timing it takes to do that has to be faster, and that's the thing. It has to be faster. If I just jump in real quick, it has to be faster than me in order to catch me. Does that make sense? So even if I had a 100-to-1 ratio, a brick wall limiter, if the attack isn't fast enough, it blows right through. Does that make sense? So the attack has to be responsible for being fast enough to catch the source. If the source is slow, like strings and things like that, not a problem. It gets super important when the source are drums, like we're going to use today. Does that make sense? So we have to have a faster attack to be able to catch it. So in the attack sequence, it's ramping up to its number. So if I was at a 20-to-1 in my attack, I'll just do some basic numbers for you out in the air. I'm at a 20-to-1. If my attack time takes a full second, what happens at half a second in my ratio? We're going from 1-to-1 to 20-to-1. What happens at half a second? Yeah, say it again.
Same.
It's 10-to-1, right? So at that half second point in the in-between, we're actually seeing the ratio be halfway at 10-to-1. So the compressor or limiter won't react at that half second the way we expect it to when we put it at 20-to-1 because we have the attack time too slow. Does that make sense? So when you look at your attack time, you're going to see it in nanoseconds and then switch over to milliseconds, and then it'll go all the way up to a full second in most cases, but it's only very useful inside of that tight frame with faster stuff. If it's a slower item, then you can go slow on the attack all day. The issue with being too slow on attack, is to be honest, is that if it's supposed to react here, but it didn't make it until here, then when this one happens and it doesn't make it until here, it's trying to do something when there's nothing that should be cut. And that's actually a cool effect that we do, and it's called pumping, right? You'll see a little bit of options for that in a second. So anyway, there's that, okay? This all just talks about the transient output level, things like that. What I just mentioned to you in a more street lingo. So release. So guess what? Release is the opposite thing. Release literally is once I jump past the threshold and I go back the other way. As soon as I'm out and I'm back in my safe zone, I'm not above it anymore. There's a timing mechanism that says how long are you going to hold on to 20-to-1 before you let it go back down to 1-to-1. Does that make sense? Again, doing that, setting that up a certain way could actually be good because it could be more musical if you're trying to make a special effect, but it can be very bad if the release time is too slow, and essentially it never releases these guys. So if the release time is too slow and it's hung up on compressing, it could be compressing dead air instead of being fast enough to react naturally with the device. So a lot of times we want the attack and release to move with the device so we feel that kind of moving, so it's not just, yes?
Does level mean dB as far as like the graph? Or what does level mean on there?
Oh yes, yeah. This is the red and the blue. Yes, those are decibels, and you can see off to the left where it's. Oh yeah, you're saying the level. It's +3, +6, +9, -3. It didn't continue on down because it's only looking at the device from 0, and it only needed that -3. In this instance, what's happening is this is the. Well, actually, I'll move the mouse on here so you can see. This is the attack phase, and this is the release phase. In the input level, this was the original source. It got up to +9, but with the attack speed the way that it is in this example, it's going to take it a couple moments before it gets down to where it's supposed to be at its maximum output. In the same method, as soon as it drops below the threshold, it's still being compressed. Because it's still being compressed, the volume is actually down on it, and until it fully releases, it won't go back to normal. So you can see how it actually drops this section right here. Like where this one would have been at a 0, it actually goes to -3 because the release phase is taking too long. A lot of times you just have to, really it's a very musical factor. You just have to listen to what the device is and listen to the reaction based upon the attack and the release time. Because you don't want it to, if it drops too far, it'll begin to create a sucking sound. Which again, it's a special effect that we use, but that's good if you're using it for a special effect. Otherwise, if your vocal is just kind of making this weird sucking noise, it's going to suck, right? It won't be very good. It'll feel off for some reason. And in some instances, it's really interesting because when you do this a lot, and too much of it's going on, oftentimes what happens is it creates weird, like it's very trippy to listen to for long periods of time. You know what I mean? Like it's just hard to listen to. It messes with your ears. But that's it in a nutshell. And same thing applies here. If I was at a 20 to 1 and it took a full second for my release, then at half a second after the device went past the threshold again on the downward, it would be at a 10 to 1 still. So that's kind of an important factor to keep an eye on. Now, there's two more elements to talk about, and then we're in it. Okay? The knee. So the knee essentially is a compensation. And you're going to see this on compression devices all over the place. The knee is a compensation, and what it does is it tries to anticipate the reaction of the ratio. So that by anticipating the reaction of the ratio, it allows the ratio or the compression or limiting to not react so harshly on a device, or maybe we do need it to be more harsh on a device. It just depends on what the attack and release times are actually set to, and more specifically how the attack reacts with the compressor limiter. So the big deal here is with a knee, a great example, on a snare drum. On a snare drum, a lot of times we would prefer the knee to be a little more hard than soft, and hard is that elbow-looking thing, where soft is the rounded version. And notice what happens here is on the front end, this is where the threshold is, so the ratio should really only be reacting here. In a hard knee, that's exactly how it is set. It's just how it's set. But in a soft knee, what happens is it anticipates, because we're getting close to the threshold, it anticipates exactly what the reaction is going to be, and it just softens it by starting the adjustment before the threshold. In the instance of a kick drum, this is typically where we have to soften the knee on a kick drum, and you'll see it as we go with it. The more compression we apply, even though it makes it more stable and more punchy on a good level, it also creates a bit of a high frequency artifact. Because of the reaction of the compression, you hear the compression start, and you hear it react, and it creates a high frequency artifact that makes it sound like there's an additional on the kick when there isn't one at all. And so if you soften the knee, that goes away, and it takes that frequency that's artificially added, and it dulls it out so that we don't have that same problem. Does that make sense? Because a lot of times, the only other way to get rid of it is to do a compressor and then go in and add an EQ and have to find what frequency that is that's added and cut it. Same way we did on Monday. But the problem with it is if we cut that, then we lose life in that frequency range where maybe we should have had it if we hadn't had this artifact come in. So softening the knee can make that adjustment a bit better for us. In the same way, a hard knee on a snare is typically good, but a hard knee on a vocal can sometimes really, like a hard knee on a vocal can add more consonance feeling when there aren't any. You know, so like when they're doing A's and O's, all of a sudden A and O sounds like it has a right at the beginning of the phrase. So softening the knee can be very important. Some devices don't have hard, soft knees. What they have some sort of makeup adjustment on the front end that allows you to make that adjustment. Some of them have what's called over easy, and that's like DBX created something called over easy, and that's soft knee essentially. Where before it was just a standard transition into the ratio. Over easy would do that principle. In the digital realm, there's an additional principle called look ahead. And guess what? Because you already recorded it to the DAW, it knows what's there milliseconds before it comes out. And it would even know what's there seconds before it comes down the line because it knows it's playing it and it's about to happen, so it can look ahead and figure out how the knee should react. It's actually a really much improved process. Gain reduction, you're going to see, all I can say is, I'll just say this. Write this down. Just write gain reduction. You can put it at the end of your list. Gain reduction is how much decibel is lost, how much we take away. How much decibel is lost. It's important to keep track of how much decibel is lost because you don't want to lose more than 50% typically. Like if you're losing too much decibel, it becomes problemsome for you. So gain reduction is decibel loss. So let me go back to some of the just basic math here. If I have a 20 to 1 ratio and I have, well, let's just say if I have a 20 to 1 ratio and I have 20 dB over the threshold, how much decibel is allowed to pass to the outlet? 1, right? Now, so if in a 20 to 1, if I have 1 that passes through, how much is lost? If I have 20 above the threshold in a 20 to 1, and 1 passes through, how much is lost? 19. What's left? So the gain reduction level on that would be 19, negative 19, essentially. It would show up as a reduction level. So what happens is when you open your compressors, you're going to see you're going to have a level that goes up and you're going to have a level that goes down. And what the level that goes down is GR, as we know, gain reduction, how much is being lost. The level that goes up is your original level. And a lot of times you'll see an output level on the after side. If you don't see an output level, some of the devices don't even have those kinds of levels on the output. So you just look down in your meters down on the track, and as long as we flip from pre-fader metering to post-fader metering in the options menu, it'll show the output level that we're at. So when we do this today, I'll have you guys flip over so that you are looking at output metering instead, or post-metering, post-processor metering instead of pre. Again, this is just good stuff to keep an eye on. You have to understand that. Sidechain is a little further down the line, but so it's a little advanced for you. But I do want to talk about makeup gain unless I passed it. Oh, I must have passed it. Unless I just didn't put it in. Huh. No, I didn't. Yeah, it's not in here. Okay. Last thing to talk about is gain. And like I'm saying, I don't see it in here. Let me just give you a definition for gain. So what happens is in gain, also known as makeup gain, is essentially your compensated offset for the volume loss. Okay, so it's a compensated offset for the volume loss. Your gain is a compensated offset for the volume loss. So what happens here is if when we take this down based on our threshold, let's say we do that at 20 to 1, just to make it nice and easy. When we cut this down on a 20 to 1 and we let a little bit pass through on both sides, this is what it looks like. So all of a sudden, this headroom that if in that issue or the example that I gave you where we had a 19 dB loss, we had 20 dB past the threshold on a 20 to 1, we had a 19 dB loss. We just made up 20 decibels in headroom that we can now turn up the whole track. Does that make sense? So all that was lost because now all of a sudden, this is where clipping was up here. We can turn this whole thing up by that amount. That's the gain. Okay? So after you're done processing and you compress it, after you have those averages set up with the threshold, the ratio, attack, release, and knee, final thing is crank it up. And you get way more power out of it because now everybody in this zone, this guy included, all of a sudden gets to be louder. Yes, sir?
So does the gain have to be like matched up to whatever threshold is, like to compensate or whatever?
It doesn't necessarily. It's a lot of times it's the taste. But you could literally say, well, if I see my gain reduction, it wouldn't be matched up to the threshold level. It'd be matched up to the gain reduction maximum that you see. So like if you're watching your clip and you go, oh, I see the maximum gain reduction I see here is a negative 10, then you can take that gain and move it to plus 10. In most cases, though, what you're allowed to do, and you'll see it as we go, is you literally just turn it up and you skirt how far you can make it, until it starts clipping. Once you see a clip, you just have to back it off. And you literally back it off by, a single tenth of a decibel, on your way, which is great. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to match. A lot of times it's the taste, because the funny thing about that is you're going to do that on the device, but then you still have a fader down below. So like you're going to maximize it there so there's a clip, but your fader adjustment down below will either still go up or down. Because like if like you're in the mix and you compress, let's say you compress guitar, you're not going to have guitar be at full bore 0 on the fader. It's typically got to go down to be in the mix. So oftentimes it doesn't necessarily behoove you to maximize on that level each item by item. But when you get to the master track and you put a compressor on the whole mix, that's when you're looking for the maximum output. Does that make sense? So that's when you're really gonna actually play with this. How much can we get away with before it clips, right? And it doesn't necessarily match. The reason it doesn't match up is because you looking at it, you wouldn't be able to tell what your highest level of clip was on your. Does that make sense? Like between where you set your threshold and above it. So you could if you sat down and did the math, but it's a lot of work, and it's just easier to ride it until you find the sweet spot. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to get into steps now. Fun part, okay? Step 1, and this is for, we're going to start with compression, okay? So this is going to be compression, and then we'll go to do limiting. So, yes?
I don't have this.
Oh, okay, I'm going to have to come through and get you guys imported. Follow these steps real quick, and then I'll come import the session for you. So step 1 is going to go to option. You're going to go to option, or options, and deselect pre-fader metering. Step 1. We need to do this so that our faders actually show and report what's happening post plugin. Does that make sense? So we want to make sure, because if we see any clipping on the track in pre-fader metering, it actually may be because of track clips versus the processing clip. Okay, so step 1 is to deactivate pre-fader metering. Step 2 is to choose a compressor limiter plugin. Now, there's not a whole lot of options here in the built-in, but when you get, once you get into this and you have a lot more options, there are other things that you can choose. But in the plugin, you're gonna have to go to dynamics, right? Because this is a dynamic processor, and you're gonna choose a compressor limiter. Now, if I get time, I'll walk you through the BF76. If I don't, I'll do it on Monday. That one's a little bit of a different beast, but for now you can choose and you can write this down. It's gonna be the Dyne 3 compressor limiter. You can also use a channel strip, but it's not a very smooth reaction. It's a cool looking device, but it doesn't work very well. All right, so in step 3, select a couple bars to loop your clip, whatever track you put this on. Select a couple bars to loop your clip. Step 4, go to options, make sure loop playback is engaged. So basically what we want it to do is we want it to loop so we can work with it pretty consistently. Now oftentimes, I'll just give you a little tip here. When you're working on a real song, you loop the verse, you go loop the chorus, you go loop the bridge, you go through each section looping it. It's just hard to manage it on a whole, because by the time you're setting up your ratio and you like your attack, the chorus kicks in and things change. So a lot of times you want to find settings for these individual sections and make sure you find the best average overall, something that you like. I'll say this, in some cases, what this takes is it takes using a different compressor in the verse for an instrument than you will in the chorus for an instrument. Same thing for vocals. You may actually, easy way to do it is just cut the clips, move them on to new tracks, and have drums for the verse, and drums for the chorus, and drums for the bridge. They're the same drums, but they're going to be processed differently to actually make distinct sounds at those particular sections. You could let them ride all the way to the end, but it becomes a very bland mix, right? So, especially if you want to have different drum sounds throughout the song, you really have to work a lot of different processing. What number are we on, 4 or 5? 5. Okay, so step 5, you're going to choose a ratio, okay? You're going to choose a ratio. Now, I'll say this. In most cases, starting on a 6-to-1 is about a good average starting point. So I would say choose a ratio, suggestion, try 6-to-1, okay? 6-to-1 is a great spot in compression. It's just middle of the road. Then, in the next step, set your threshold. You have to actually turn it down, but you're going to set your threshold so that you begin to see gain reduction. I'll leave my settings. I'll show you what I do. I'll leave my settings on the board. Now, gain reduction just depends on how much. If you're like, how much gain reduction do I need? Oftentimes, it just depends on the instrument, right? If it's a vocal, I'll say this: if it's a vocal with someone singing, it's not a lot of gain reduction. If it's a vocal and someone screaming, it just depends on how powerful you want that scream. A lot of times you will use a lot of gain reduction on something like that to make it more aggressive. Strings, you're going to use light compression. Brass, you may use a little more compression. As soon as you get into a drum set, you're going to use a lot more strong amounts of compression, so more gain reduction. It just depends, and it varies on instrument by instrument. So I'm going to show you the kick drum as I set this up. In the next step, go ahead and set attack and release to the specific device. It's going to be to taste to the specific device. I can't tell you that they're all going to be fast. It depends on what the specific device is or the specific source is. So in some instances, like drums are a great example. Drums are going to need a faster attack, and the release needs to be medium to fast, but it can't be, if it's making it sound too choppy, it can't be completely fast, nor can it be very slow. Okay? So, and once you're done with that, well, you know, for kick drum, you know what? I'll show it to you. We'll do one more thing after this. After you're done setting attack and release, set in your final step, set your gain, turn your gain up to compensate for the gain reduction. And what you'll have to do is you'll have to watch your meters to make sure that you're not clipping. So you're going to turn that gain back up to get your volume back out. Now, let me just say this, though. As we're getting this set up, there's an additional step I'm going to show you on the side chain, but I need to kind of explain how that works for you guys. And once you're kind of in it, and you've done it the first time, I'll go back and explain the sidechain option for you because it opens up a couple different parameters and ability. Let me go ahead and show this to you real quick, and then I'll have you guys work away at it. So again, I'm going to go to options, make sure loop playback's engaged, make sure pre-fader metering is disengaged. I'm going to go down into the track and pick a couple bars, so make sure you're in grid mode. Oops, make sure you're in grid mode, make sure you're in bars and beats, and just take a couple bars and push play. Now, you can either choose the option to solo this or not solo this. In this instance, because I'm starting with a kick drum, I am going to solo the kick drum, but when I move on to snare, I'm going to leave the kick drum open typically. You guys remember that conversation? Keeping those tracks open. So let me bring this in. Okay, so looking at this device, sorry, it's still kind of mild. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and decide on a ratio. Like I said, you can start with a 6:1. You may need more or less, depending on the source. So I'm just going to drop this here. And then you'll notice there's an input, an output, and the gain reduction. This yellow guy over here actually represents my threshold, so you'll see it move. Right now I have about a -8. So you can hear I'm squishing it too far. It doesn't sound very good because right now it's at about a -18. So I want to make sure my threshold is still getting some gain reduction, but not so much that it's killing the sound. Now, my attack's kind of slow, so let me move it forward. Unfortunately, my gain reduction meter is not moving very quickly. Yeah. See how that tone just changes? Now in the release, watch what happens when I go fast. When I go slow. Because it takes forever, when I put it slow, it's going to take 4 seconds for the gain reduction to go away. My 6:1 holds on even after the kick is done. See how the meter's barely moving? It's because it's always in a gain reduction state because this is too long. Benefit of it being somewhat long is listen to how tight it got. So you kind of want to find a nice sweet spot in the middle where it's fluxing, but it's nice and pronounced. Let me move something real quick. Now, once that's done, if you look down on your meters, see how high or how low I am? I'm almost at like a -28 here because zero's up here. Oh, wow, look at all this headroom I get. Now, the other thing you have to look for, you may not actually be clipping down here, like the yellow is a soft clip, but look at the output here. Because you can actually clip the plug-in before you even clip the final output in the meters here, and you could kind of hear it. So let's listen to it without it. And with it. And then when it joins everybody else, This is it before. This is with it on. So all of a sudden our kick, we finally draw out our kick. Now I have one more step I'm going to add to this, but I'm not going to do it until you guys go through this process. Go ahead and jump in this and do the steps. Let me get you guys in this session real quick. Go ahead and go to File, Import Session Data. And then if you can navigate to your folder on the data drive, navigate to your folder on the data drive, please. And then hopefully you have the, did you have the kick snare session on this computer? Actually click class 11 and see what you have in there. Okay, there's something in there. So we're going to have to drag something on. We just need to get it from the MTL server. Did you have anything in there? No, if you didn't, you can take it from the, shared student files. Go to, I think it's this one, that kick snare AC. That one. The one without the 2017. Copy that and paste it in your data drive. And then that's the one you're going to choose when you go to file session, import data. So slide down a little bit, it says kick snare. There it is, kick snare AC. Not the one there. Yeah, just hit Command C and paste it. Yeah, if you hit Command C on that folder, and then go to your data drive and your name, you can hit Command V. Yeah, hit Command V while you're there. Oh shoot, you were inside the, sorry. You're not in the Finder, you were inside the, you're inside the import view. So you have to do the same thing, but just do it in the Finder. And switch to list view, it'll help you. There you go. And then after you, Miles, after you do that, you can do the file import session data. You guys doing okay?
Am I fixing it to class 16 or just my data drive?
Do it on the data. Yeah, do it in that folder there. Yeah, there you go. Bingo. Perfect. And then after that comes through, you go back to your file import, that window back here. That's underneath. Yeah, click it. One more level back. Yeah, and then choose the KSNAC, KSNAC. You could do the one that doesn't say version 2. And then, yeah. Then you're going to bring in the tempo, and then only select the kick, snare, and the overhead left, overhead right, those 4. So you just click on, just click it. Yeah, new track. Actually, yeah, there you go. And make sure you get the kick and the last overhead, and that's it. No, you skip one here. Undo that one, take that one back, make that one done, and then hit OK.
I'm trying to copy and paste this.
Oh, but you're just, okay, so what you need to do is just hit Command C, click on it. Click on it over here. That one right there. See over here. Hit Command C. And then go to,
the one without the 2017.
yeah, that one's the right one though. That's in the, that was in the right folder. Go to the data drive and pick your folder out. And then just hit Command V. Oh, you're in the, shoot, he did the same thing. You're in the import window. You have to do
Oh,
it.
it goes in the Finder.
You gotta hit the Finder, yeah. Sorry. You can just hit Command C. This one, right?
Yeah.
And hit Command V. There we go. Once that comes through, open this up and choose the PTX, the one that doesn't say version 2. And then you can hit open.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Yep, there you go. And then you're going to choose tempo mapping, tempo and meter map, and then get the kick, snare, overhead left, overhead right. That's it. Yep. There you go. And then hit OK. Right. And then away you go. So you'll just immediately start by doing the steps. You can just hit down. It's fine. Everybody okay? So far, so good? Okay, so real quick, let me just show you, hopefully you kind of got worked through that a little bit. You can see the settings that I had adjusted here. Let me show you the knee operation. So this is adjustments to the knee. We were talking about this before.
So it's a little more rounded, a little more punchy on this side. I'm actually going to keep this as a hard knee. I don't mind it. But what I want to show you is there's something called side chain. There's two types of side chain. I didn't necessarily want to get into this in the slides because slides have a million things to say about side chain, but let me just give you the quick and dirty. In a side chain, you have two options. One is called key input, which hopefully you'll learn later down the road. Key input just allows you to actually have another device connected to this compressor. So this compressor is on the kick drum, but you can have another device controlling the reaction to this. So like, you know how we set a threshold and things had to go beyond the threshold? We could put another source to breach the threshold, but the reaction will happen on this track. The reason we do that a lot of times is if we want things to sync better. Or if we have multiple takes, or even in the digital realm. Let's say you have virtual drums, and you use a bunch of samples, and like you stack up 4 kick drums, okay? Those 4 kick drums, you could technically create one of them as a master key and have all the other 3 be compressed based upon the one master kick drum, so that the timings of the kick drums all align the same. A lot of times you'll do that with a gate instead of a compressor, so there's an option for you there, but you can also compress them the same way. Sometimes you'll sidechain key a bass guitar and a kick drum together so that the bass and the kick move together in terms of when they react and how they react, so they feel like they're pumping together. But in this instance, we're going to use the side chain filter option. The side chain filter option, there was a section in the slides. You don't have to write the notes, but let me show the side chain filter option to you so that you can see it. Side chain. Oh, wrong one. There we go. Basically what happens is, this essentially is your, if you think of this as your compression device, normally the level detection is immediately in line. So the level detection would normally be sitting here in a standard audio input. It would detect your level, it would do the gain reduction, it would send it out. In a sidechain, what we do is we allow it to split the signal, and that split signal allows us to go down a different path. That's how we can get the external input from a different device to send to the level detection, and yet actually our audio is still routed through the device and the device reacts upon it. Well, what we do in this instance with the filter is we basically put an EQ out here. And by putting an EQ out here, what it does is it doesn't EQ the signal, it EQs the trigger signal. So like essentially it uses this as a trigger signal while the original signal goes through affected by the parameters of the trigger signal. So essentially this trigger signal we get to filter. So here's a great example. If we're using a kick drum, what do you think the loudest frequencies are involved in a kick drum? What would be the loudest frequencies involved in a kick drum? Yeah, low end, right? Well, the problem with that is the compressor is just looking for who breaches the threshold. It's not told any difference between frequencies. It doesn't care if it's high frequencies or low. Whoever breaches my threshold, that's who I react upon, but I react upon the whole thing, right? So reaction is upon the whole device. Well, what if I'm like, well, dude, here's the thing. You know, my low end is so much louder than everything else. The problem with it is it's the compression reactions are only causing gain reduction to be applied to low end and not everybody else evenly. What do? We send it through the sidechain option. We filter it, right, by taking out the low end as part of the trigger mechanism. By filtering out the low end as a trigger mechanism, it allows everything else is average to now all of a sudden be compressed based upon the average of everything else other than the low end, which allows for the low end to be more even and all the rest of the sound to be more fulfilled. Here's how we do it in this particular device. To do a sidechain key filter, all you have to do, all right, so if you just want to write this in your notes, sidechain key filter, all you have to do over here, or I'm sorry, it's not the key filter, it's a sidechain filter, sorry. The sidechain filter, all you have to do over here is activate the high frequency or the low frequency and set the frequency. That's it. So to activate it, all you have to do is turn on, that's this little in button, turn on the high frequency filter or the low frequency filter and set the frequency. So watch what I'm going to do. In this instance, I'm going to use the low frequency filter. And I'm going to move the frequency beyond the low mids. Did you hear what happened? Watch, I'll bypass it. Here's where they're going in. Now all of a sudden we get that low end back. Now we probably want to still EQ it a little. There's a little bit of muffling. It was still happening in the low mids. So really gonna have to bounce back and forth. Not bothering me there. Yes.
So sidechain, like, when you do the compressor unlimited, it kind of changes the whole sound, but then the sidechain brings it back without like the clipping.
Yeah, essentially it gives you a little more room on it. The only other thing you see is the gain reduction. Because when I put this in, I have to adjust my gain because now the volume of that low end is back in. It's a little bit of adjustment needing to be made here. But yeah, essentially what it's doing is it's allowing us to kind of filter out who gets controlled in that realm. Goodness. Okay, go ahead and do that with your kick drum real quick. It's going to offset your gain makeup. It's going to be a little too loud, so you got to make sure it doesn't clip. You're going to do it to taste. You have your headphones on. You should be able to hear it quite a bit. All right, guys. If you guys have any questions, I'd have you guys say where you are, and we can pick up on Monday. We'll be back at it. I think we're gonna get a little further into this so you can see it in action a little more, and we can talk a little more about the parameters. Everybody signed in, right? There's a sign-in sheet somewhere. Hanif and Miles, did you guys sign in?
Yeah.
You did. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you guys. Any questions? No? Pretty cool. It's gonna be more fun. Be better as it goes.
Awesome job, guys. See you soon. Huh?
Yeah, actually.
So all the Pro Tools working to your knowledge?
Yeah, everything seems like it's doing well.
Yeah, so far so good. Yeah, a lot of compression limiting conversations today.
All right.